causing millions of struggling Americans to lose their unemployment benefits for a week for no real reason. None whatsoever. Does he now top Herbert Hoover when it comes to callousness and cruelty? And as the COVID death toll continues to rise, is he no longer just one of the worst presidents in American history, but the worst? Who better to ask than Michael Beschloss, presidential historian for NBC News and MSNBC. He joins me now. Michael, thanks so much for coming on the show. Does Donald Trump now make Herbert Hoover look like Mother Teresa?
Yeah, you know, Mehdi, it does make Herbert Hoover look like Mother Teresa, both because Hoover was personally a very compassionate person. He helped people get food in World War I and after World War II, but he did believe at the time of the Great Depression, with millions of Americans starving and dying in some cases, he felt it was not the federal government's job to help them. That was something that FDR did feel. And what it leads to, Mehdi, is that you always want someone as president who has compassion and empathy. A Lincoln, for instance, who early in the Civil War, there were so many Union soldiers being killed that they said, we need to build a new cemetery. Where do you want it? And Lincoln said, build it near my summer house because I want to see the graves being dug. I want to see the weeping widows. It's going to be very painful for me, but I want to always see the results of the terrible decisions I'm making. That's what a real leader does. That's what a real president does.
Yeah, as opposed to the current president who, when confronted with the COVID death toll, says it is what it is. Michael, many presidents have sadly caused harm to the American people or been indifferent to the suffering of ordinary Americans. But can you point to another president who's done the kind of thing Trump did this weekend, delaying financial aid to unemployed Americans for no other reason than that he was having a tantrum and busy golfing? There was no ideological or policy reason for doing what he did yesterday.
No, Donald Trump is the kind of person that we have never, ever seen before in the presidency, and I hope we never, ever see again. And what I mean by that is someone who, you know, most of us, Mehdi, when you get to the age of 6, you begin to care for other people and see the world through their eyes, especially when they're suffering. You particularly want that in a president of the United States. Dwight Eisenhower was the supreme commander on D-Day. The decisions he made meant the deaths of a lot of young Americans and others, and he knew it. For the rest of his life, Eisenhower was a tough guy, but whenever he spoke in public about the men, mostly men, some women, on D-Day, he would cry in public and have to put a handkerchief over his face. Lyndon Johnson, when he was president, Johnson knew what it was like for black people to be beaten up in the streets of the cities of this country, and it made him want to do something about it. When you've got a president who has no empathy, who has no compassion, you see a spectacle like what we've seen this week.
Yeah, and I wonder, when you study the biographies of these men, as you have, and of course they've all been men, do you come across them openly talking about their legacies and wondering how history will judge them?
Yes, they do. But they do it in terms of, you know, what can I do to make this country better so that 50 years from now people will say, this is something that this president did that was distinctive, and maybe he did it against his own selfish political self-interest. Hard to think of a case where Donald Trump has ever done that. And also, Harry Truman once said he couldn't imagine a president who does not read history, because the only way a president, he said, can get any benefit from all the successes and failures of earlier presidents and earlier citizens is to know where they succeeded and failed in history. He said that every reader will not be a leader, but every leader must be a reader. If Truman came back and saw a president as completely ignorant and indifferent to history as Donald Trump, I think he would have been shocked.
Michael, aren't you being unfair to Donald Trump? He says he studied history and he's the best president since Lincoln.
Okay, well, I'm the king of Romania, Mehdi.
I got to ask you before I let you go. I've asked you this before, I'm going to ask you again. When do we go beyond saying Donald Trump is among the worst presidents in history and say, with days to go till he leaves office, he's basically the worst?
Well, a historian has to always account for the possibility that 50 years later a president would look better in some ways than he did to his own generation. That having been said, Donald Trump is not going to change the record. He was largely responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans who did not need to die. Millions of others who suffer from COVID who did not need to suffer. An economic calamity that is afflicting people tonight in a way that is not going to be alleviated by $600 or $2,000 while the president sits in Palm Beach and the vice president sits in Vail on a ski slope and the secretary of the Treasury is in Cabo San Lucas in Mexico. This is really Nero's fiddling while Rome burns.
Indeed. America is burning in so many ways today. Michael, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure to have you on. I always learn so much from you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Same with me.
As Mark